I never imagined that the most painful moment of my life would begin with something as small and ordinary as a closed hand. My son Ethan's hand. A hand that I expected would open with wonder when I offered him my grandfather Arthur's old watch, the same watch that survived wars, storms, and decades of stories told beside warm Christmas fires. I thought that, when I placed that watch in his palm, time would finally make sense between us. I thought it would heal what had been silent for too long. But instead, on that cold Christmas Eve, in our quiet house just outside Toronto, Ethan looked at the watch as if it were a wound. Then he closed his hand, gently pushed mine back, and refused to wear it. People often say that silence is peaceful. They are wrong. Silence can be sharp, heavy, and humiliating. When Ethan refused my gift, it felt like someone had turned off all the lights inside me. The Christmas tree behind us blinked softly, almost mocking the moment, and for the first time in my life I felt like a stranger in my own home. I thought I understood my son. I thought the distance between us was just part of growing older. I was wrong. His refusal was not about the watch. It was about everything the watch represented. Everything I had failed to be. If someone had walked into the room at that moment, they might have thought it was a simple family disagreement, a young man not wanting an old accessory. But that moment carried years of untold truths, unspoken apologies, and memories I kept locked away, hoping time would bury them. I had spent my life believing that love alone was enough, that providing was the same as being present, that silence meant peace. What a lie that was. That night, Ethan's refusal forced me to face the truth. Somewhere along the path of my life, I stopped being the father he needed. Maybe it was the nights I came home late. Maybe it was the Christmas when Grace, my wife, looked at me with tired eyes full of disappointment. Maybe it was the way I tried to pass down traditions without passing down tenderness. Whatever the reason, that small moment with the watch was the doorway to everything I had avoided for years. Before I tell you what Ethan said next, the words that shattered everything I thought I knew, I want to know something from you. Yes, you who are listening right now. Tell me, where are you watching or hearing this story from? Your city, your country, your room, anywhere. I like to imagine the world as thousands of tiny lights, each person carrying their own Christmas memories, their own regrets, their own hopes. And while you're here, if this story already touched you even a little, consider subscribing so you don't miss the rest, because what comes after this moment changed my life forever. The truth behind Ethan's refusal is not what you assume. It's far deeper, far heavier, and it nearly destroyed us. I remember the weight of the small velvet box in my hand as if it were made of stone. It was Christmas Eve, the kind of cold night when the air outside seems to freeze even the thoughts inside your head. The living room smelled of pine and cinnamon, a scent that always reminded me of Grace, because she used to mix cinnamon into everything during the holidays, saying it warmed the heart even when words failed. The heater hummed softly, trying its best to keep the winter from slipping in through the windows, but the real cold that night wasn't outside. It was the cold I felt inside my own chest as I sat across from Ethan, my son, hoping that the gift I was about to give him would somehow build a bridge across the distance that had grown between us over the years. The lights on the tree flickered in slow, steady pulses, almost like a tired heartbeat, casting patches of gold across Ethan's face. He looked older than I remembered, not in the physical sense, but in the way someone looks when they've carried something heavy for too long. His shoulders were tense, his eyes fixed on the floor, his fingers tapping against his leg with that quiet restlessness he had as a child whenever he was thinking too deeply. I kept telling myself that this moment would finally pull us together again, that maybe giving him Arthur's watch would speak louder than all the things I had failed to say. I opened my mouth to talk, but the words felt thick, clumsy, almost embarrassing, so I simply held out the box. For a second, Ethan didn't even look up, and something inside me cracked, just a tiny fracture, almost too small to notice. When his eyes finally lifted to meet mine, there was something there I couldn't read. Not anger. Not sadness. Something colder. Something final. I placed the box in his hands and watched him open it. The soft ticking from inside filled the room with a rhythm I knew better than my own heartbeat. That watch had survived Arthur's long shifts at the old mill, the storms he used to tell us about, and the Christmas when the roof leaked so badly he held a pot above his head while laughing like a young boy. It had survived my childhood, my mistakes, my stubbornness. I believed it would survive my relationship with my son too. I believed wrong. Ethan looked at the watch as though it were a memory he didn't want to hold. His chest rose slowly, and he let out a breath that sounded like someone giving up on something important. I waited for gratitude, surprise, anything. Instead, he closed the box gently, almost carefully, as if he didn't want to hurt the watch itself, and pushed it back toward me. In that moment the room didn't feel small, it felt enormous, like there was suddenly a canyon between us, a space filled with things we had never said. I felt humiliation first, like a rush of heat against the cold air. Then confusion. Then an ache so sharp I had to swallow twice before I could breathe. I told myself not to show it. Fathers aren't supposed to break, not in front of their children, even when their children are grown. Ethan mumbled something soft, barely a whisper, something like "I can't," but the words twisted around themselves. I could have asked why. I could have insisted. I could have demanded an explanation. But years of pride sealed my mouth shut. I simply nodded as if he had refused a cup of tea instead of a piece of our family's soul. He stood up and walked to the window, staring at the snow outside, leaving me alone with the box in my lap. I traced the edge of it with my thumb, feeling the memories of my childhood like little ghosts pressing against my skin. I remembered Arthur's voice telling me never to forget the sound of time passing, because life always feels long until suddenly it doesn't. I remembered Grace smiling on Christmas mornings, telling Ethan stories about how every ticking sound was a heartbeat of someone who had loved us before we were even born. And now I sat there, alone, the same ticking echoing in the room like a reminder that I had wasted more minutes than I had left. I wanted to ask Ethan what the watch meant to him now. I wanted to tell him what it had meant to me. But the room felt fragile, like a thin sheet of ice over deep water, and any wrong word would break it completely. So I stayed silent. And he stayed silent. And the space between us grew even wider. When he finally turned back to me, his eyes were glassy but not from tears. They were distant, as if he were looking at me from years away, not just across the room. He said my name quietly, not Dad, just Samuel, and that alone felt like a blow. I felt something inside me sink, heavy and irreversible. A father should never hear his own name from his child's mouth like that. A father should never become a stranger. He didn't explain his refusal. He didn't know me words, and maybe he didn't have the strength to offer them yet. He simply walked upstairs, leaving me in the quiet glow of the tree, holding a watch that suddenly felt too heavy to carry. I sat there long after he was gone, listening to the ticking inside the box, wondering if time was trying to warn me or punish me. Wondering why, after years of trying to rebuild something, a simple gesture could reveal how fragile everything truly was. As I stared at the dark hallway where Ethan had disappeared, I realized something unsettling. His refusal wasn't the beginning of our problem, it was the echo of something that had started long before. I stayed in the living room long after Ethan went upstairs, sitting in the faint glow of the Christmas tree as if the lights could explain what I couldn't understand. The watch box rested on my lap, warm from my hands, but somehow it felt colder than the snow piling up outside. The ticking inside it seemed louder now, almost impatient, like time itself was urging me to remember something I had tried too hard to forget. And maybe that's why my mind, without asking my permission, pulled me backward into the past, into winters that smelled of wood smoke and wet wool, into nights where the world felt simpler, and love seemed like something you could fix just by trying hard enough. I closed my eyes and, suddenly, I was a boy again, walking beside my grandfather Arthur on a Christmas Eve so cold the air made our breath puff out like miniature clouds. He held my small hand in his enormous one, the watch tucked safely into the front pocket of his vest. It always seemed to glow faintly through the fabric, as if it carried its own light. Arthur didn't talk much, but when he did, his words felt carved from something heavier than wood or stone. He told me once that a man should always know the weight of the promises he makes, because if he forgets them, the world forgets him. I didn't understand back then. I only nodded, pretending to be older than I was, wanting to make him proud. Every Christmas, he would let me hold the watch for a moment, just a moment, because he said it kept better time when a child touched it. I believed him. Children believe things because they want to, not because they make sense. I remember standing under the lights of the old town square, watching the snowflakes drift slowly down, each one landing on the warm metal in my hand and melting instantly. Arthur told me that time melts the same way quietly, without us noticing. Maybe that's why the memory of him feels so bright and yet so far away, like one of those old lights you can see in the sky even though the star has already died. When Arthur passed the watch to me, I promised myself I would do the same with my son one day. I thought that giving Ethan the watch would be like handing him the love that built me, the strength that kept our family standing even when everything else fell apart. But sitting there in the present, with the box unopened again and the room dimming as the tree blinked lazily, I realized something: Ethan didn't grow up with the same memories I did. He didn't have Arthur's hand guiding him through the snow. He didn't have those quiet nights in the mill, listening to stories of men who worked hard and loved harder. Ethan's memories had different lights, different shadows, some of which I had placed there without noticing. And then another memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome, the kind that stings before you even understand why. It was a Christmas when Ethan was still small, maybe 8 or 9, and Grace had baked cinnamon bread early in the morning because she said the smell made the house feel alive. I had come home late the night before, too tired and too distracted to notice how the boy watched me with eyes full of something I didn't have a name for. That morning, I sat beside Arthur's watch on the table, promising myself I would take Ethan outside to see the snowfall. But the phone rang, and I left, telling Grace it would only be a few minutes. Hours passed. By the time I walked back through the door, Ethan was curled up on the couch, the cinnamon smell fading from the air, the window fogged from where he had been staring out into the white afternoon. I remember brushing snow from my coat and thinking he looked disappointed in a way a child shouldn't know how to be. The truth is that I spent years believing that love could be stored, like money in a bank, and taken out when needed. I thought taking care of the house, providing everything, fixing broken things around the yard, that all counted as being a good father. Maybe it did, in some way. But love is not a savings account. It's a lamp that needs to be lit every day, especially on the dark ones. Another memory pushed through. A different Christmas. Ethan older. Quiet. That strange silence between us growing like frost on a window. I remember feeling frustrated, thinking he didn't appreciate the life I worked so hard to build. But sitting now with the watch in my lap, I finally understood something painful. The distance between us didn't start with his silence. It started with mine. In the glow of the tree I could almost hear Grace's voice, the soft way she used to laugh whenever I tried to fix something too quickly. She would tell me that not everything broken wants a hammer, some things just need time and warmth. She said it dozens of times, but I didn't listen, or maybe I didn't want to. Looking back, I realized she tried to warn me, tried to show me the cracks forming between Ethan and me long before they grew too wide to ignore. As the memory of her faded, the living room seemed strangely empty. The watch in the box felt heavier than ever, as if it carried not just the past but all the moments I let slip by unnoticed. I wondered then if Ethan saw the watch not as a gift, but as a reminder of everything he lost because of me. The snow outside thickened, falling in slow sheets that caught the streetlights like tiny pieces of broken glass. I stood up and walked to the window, resting my hand against the cold glass. In the reflection, I saw myself, not the father I wanted to be, but the man I had been, tired, distracted, carrying his own shadows without realizing they were spilling onto the people he loved most. The truth was becoming clear, slowly, painfully, like a fog lifting. The watch didn't belong to Ethan yet. Not because he didn't want it, but because I hadn't earned the right to give it. And somewhere upstairs, I heard the faint creak of floorboards, Ethan moving around his room, carrying memories of his own and memories I still didn't know, memories that were waiting for me to finally listen. I didn't sleep that night. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you start hearing things that aren't really there, faint echoes of old footsteps, distant laughter from years ago, the soft hum of conversations that once filled the hallway. I sat in my chair beside the tree, the lights blinking slowly, almost as if they were breathing. Every time I closed my eyes, memories drifted toward me, memories I had spent years pushing away, memories that carried the weight of all the words I should have said but never did. It's strange how the mind works on Christmas Eve. It's like the heart becomes softer, more fragile, more willing to open the doors it normally keeps locked. Maybe it's the lights. Maybe it's the cold outside. Or maybe it's the unavoidable truth that Christmas is as much about remembering as it is about celebrating. And that night, my memories led me back to one moment in particular, one I wish I could erase or rewrite, but life doesn't give us that option. Ethan was 14. The age when boys start to grow into shapes they don't fully understand yet. The age when they're both too young and too old at the same time. Grace had left earlier that day to take care of her sister, who wasn't feeling well. It was just me and Ethan at home. I had come back from work exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that makes a man's heart feel too heavy for his chest. Money was tight. My job was draining the life out of me. And Ethan, just trying to help, had accidentally broken a part of the old radio I'd been trying to fix. It seems insignificant now, almost laughably small, but in that moment, I snapped. I raised my voice in a way I never should have. I told him he was careless. I told him he didn't appreciate anything. I told him he was ungrateful. The word hung in the air like a stone. His face changed. His shoulders dropped in a way I still remember too clearly. He didn't cry, that would have been easier for me to understand. Instead, he stood perfectly still. Silent. Hurt. Then he walked away without looking back. That moment carved something into him. I didn't know it then, but I felt it now, with painful clarity. Those words became a seed, and over the years it grew into the distance that sat between us. I never apologized. Not once. I told myself he would forget, that boys are strong, that these things happen. I was too proud, too tired, too blind. Later that same night, after my anger had cooled, I found him sitting outside on the back steps, staring at the snow as it fell in soft spirals around him. He didn't shiver. He didn't speak. I sat beside him, thinking my presence alone would fix everything. I didn't say sorry. I didn't tell him I loved him. I thought silence could heal what my words had damaged, but silence only buried it deeper. I opened my eyes in the present, sitting alone in the dim glow of the Christmas tree, and the weight of that memory pressed against me like cold hands around my heart. Maybe Ethan didn't refuse the watch because of the watch itself. Maybe he refused it because it came from a man who had never truly learned how to speak the words that mattered. I stood up slowly and walked toward the hallway, thinking I should talk to him, apologize after all these years. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I stopped. I heard the faint clicking of something metal from his room. For a moment, hope flickered inside me. Maybe he was looking at the watch, maybe he was trying to understand. But then the sound stopped, replaced by silence again. And I didn't climb the stairs. Fear held me in place. I went back to the living room, sat down, and whispered a sentence into the empty air, a sentence I had carried in my throat for almost 20 years. I'm sorry, Ethan. The words felt softer than I expected, almost fragile, as if they could break if spoken too loudly. But even whispered, they filled the room with something I hadn't felt in a long time: truth. And truth, even painful truth, can warm a cold house. I know some of you listening right now carry similar words in your chest: apologies you were too afraid to say, mistakes you hoped time would fix, silences you thought would fade on their own. Tell me in the comments if you've ever felt that heavy kind of regret, the kind that sits in your throat for years. And while you're here, if this story is touching something in you, don't forget to subscribe. Stories like this aren't just mine, they're pieces of all of us, scattered across memories we don't always know how to face. As I sat there, the tree lights blinking like fading stars, I knew deep inside that the watch wasn't the real problem. It was just the door. And behind the door was a truth Ethan had carried alone for far too long, something he never told me, something I didn't want to believe existed. And soon, I would find out. I walked down the hallway the next morning with the quiet steps of a man afraid of waking the past. The house felt colder than usual, though the heater hummed softly through the vents. Maybe it was just me. Maybe it was the weight of the night before, the unfinished apologies still clinging to my ribs. Christmas morning was supposed to be warm, soft, gentle. But in our home that day, everything felt wrapped in a kind of fragile silence, like the thin layer of frost that covers a window before the sun touches it. I stood in front of Ethan's door and stared at the wood for longer than I should have. It was just a door, simple and familiar, but on that morning it felt like the entrance to a part of my son's life that I had never dared to truly explore. I raised my hand to knock, then lowered it again. My chest tightened. I wasn't sure if I feared waking him or waking the truth. Before Grace passed, she used to tell me that Ethan's silence wasn't empty, it was full of things he didn't know how to say. I didn't listen then. I told myself boys needed space, that they learned strength through quiet, that wounds would heal on their own if you gave them time. But wounds don't heal without care. And some wounds don't close at all if they were formed in the dark. I knocked gently this time, barely a sound, the kind of knock a man gives when he knows he doesn't deserve to enter. No answer. I tried again, a little louder. Still nothing. The door wasn't locked, and for a moment I wondered if I had the right to go in. But I wasn't searching for control. I was searching for the boy I had lost somewhere between my pride and my silence. When I opened the door, the first thing I noticed was the cold air inside his room. The window was cracked open just enough to let December seep in. Snowflakes drifted through the gap, melting instantly on the carpet. Ethan's bed was neatly made, untouched. He hadn't slept there. I felt something tighten inside me again, a familiar ache, the fear of not knowing where my son had been the night before. His desk was scattered with things I had never seen him keep: old notebooks, pages torn from sketchpads, drawings that looked like unfinished memories. There were no photos of me. Not even one. But there was a small picture of Grace tucked inside a book, the edges worn as if he had held it too many times. Beside it sat a pair of headphones and a notebook filled with small scribbles, words written over and over in tiny letters. I picked it up carefully, almost reverently, like touching something sacred. The page was covered in the same sentence repeated dozens of times: I hope he doesn't leave again. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I ran my fingers over the page, feeling the indentations of his handwriting, each repetition a confession he never spoke out loud. I remembered the nights I came home late, the excuses I told myself, that work demanded it, that I needed the extra hours, that being tired wasn't a sin. But to a child, a door closing late at night sounds like abandonment. And the sentence on the page was the proof I had never wanted to find. I turned another page. Another sentence repeated again and again, like a mantra, like a prayer. I'm scared he won't come back. I closed my eyes. I could almost hear Ethan writing it, maybe years ago, maybe last winter, maybe during the Christmas when I didn't show up until after midnight. I had never wondered what he felt on those nights. I had told myself he understood. Children shouldn't have to understand. They should feel safe. I sat on the edge of his bed and let the weight of those words settle into my bones. This wasn't just about the watch. It wasn't about the Christmas gift he refused. It was about years of fear bottled inside him, hidden behind the door I never opened. I began to see pieces of the truth I had ignored for too long, pieces that explained the distance, the silence, the coldness in his eyes the night before. Then another memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in years. A night when Grace came into our bedroom after tucking Ethan in. Her eyes were tired. She told me he had been having nightmares, waking up crying, asking where I was, why I was gone so late. I brushed it off, telling her he would grow out of it. She insisted it was deeper than that. I told her she was worrying too much. I made her feel foolish for caring. Now, sitting in Ethan's room with his childhood fears written in ink, I felt the full weight of that mistake. Grace had seen it. She had always seen it. I had chosen not to. And Ethan had carried the fear alone. On the far corner of the desk, under a pile of books, I spotted something else, a small, folded piece of paper. I opened it. A sketch. Not detailed, not polished. Just a simple drawing of a boy sitting at the top of the stairs, knees pulled to his chest, listening to the sound of the front door opening. The figure drawn beside the door was me, tired, slouched, smelling of cold air and long days. The boy looked small. Too small. I swallowed hard. The paper trembled in my hands. Ethan had been waiting for me. Not once. Not twice. Dozens of nights. And I never saw him. I placed the drawing back gently, as if it were made of glass. My hand shook as I walked to the window and closed it, shutting out the cold. I knew then, with a certainty that broke me, that the watch didn't represent love to Ethan. It represented waiting. Silence. Fear. The ticking inside that little metal case wasn't comforting to him. It was a reminder of every night he sat alone in the dark, hoping the door would open sooner, hoping I would choose him over everything else. I stood there in the middle of his room, surrounded by memories I never helped him carry, and I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. A father shouldn't discover his child's wounds this late. A father shouldn't need a watch to realize time was already slipping away. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the world in white. Inside, I felt the first crack of truth opening, wide and unforgiving. And I knew that whatever secret Ethan had been carrying, I still hadn't reached the darkest part. I left Ethan's room carrying a heaviness that clung to me like the cold air outside our windows. The quiet of the house followed me down the hallway, a quiet shaped not by peace but by all the conversations that never happened. When I reached the living room again, the tree lights were still blinking slowly, steady as a heartbeat, untouched by the storms inside me. I sat down, holding my hands together, feeling the sting of an old truth rising from a place I tried to bury years ago. If there was a night that shaped the distance between me and my son more than any other, it was a Christmas when everything felt too loud, too cold, too broken, and I chose to walk away instead of staying. I can still see it clearly, that night, like a crack across the glass of my memory. The year had been hard. Money was tight. Work was heavy. Grace was exhausted. Ethan had started withdrawing into himself, becoming quieter, carrying shadows under his eyes that shouldn't belong to a child. I knew something was wrong, but instead of leaning in, I leaned out. I convinced myself I was doing my best, that providing was more important than listening, that stress made me short-tempered but that it didn't define me. I told myself so many lies back then that I forgot the shape of the truth. It was Christmas Eve. The house was warm because Grace always made sure it was, filling the kitchen with the smell of cinnamon and baking bread even when she barely had the energy to stand. Ethan sat by the window with a book in his hands, pretending to read, but his eyes kept drifting toward the door. He had been waiting for me all week. He asked if we could build a snowman later, or bake cookies, or watch the old Christmas movies his mother loved. And each time, I told him we would, soon, later, tomorrow. But tomorrow kept slipping further away from me. That night, I came home late again, carrying the fatigue of a man who believed he had no choice. The snow was falling heavily, clinging to my coat, melting into cold droplets that slid down my sleeves. When I opened the door, Ethan looked up with hope so bright it felt like a spotlight aimed directly at my flaws. He stood, holding his small box he had wrapped himself with uneven tape and crooked folds. He told me he made something for me, something he hoped I would like. His voice trembled just enough for me to notice, but I was too tired, too afraid, too full of my own worries to see what it meant. I snapped again. Not in a violent way, not even loudly. But in that quiet, sharp tone that cuts deeper than shouting ever could. I told him not now. I told him to sit down, to stop hovering, to give me space. I saw his face fall, but I pretended I didn't. I took off my coat and dropped it on the chair, letting the cold air linger in the room while Grace looked at me with a mix of disappointment and sadness that I brushed aside with the wave of a tired hand. Later that evening, after dinner, Grace tried to talk to me. She said Ethan had been anxious all week, that he wasn't sleeping, that something was weighing on him. She said he needed me not later, not tomorrow, but now. And instead of listening, I walked to the door, grabbed my coat again, and said I needed air. It was the worst thing I could have done. Not because I left, but because of what Ethan saw as I walked out. I will never forget the look in his eyes. He was sitting on the stairs, clutching that small gift he had wrapped so carefully. His eyes weren't angry. They were scared. Scared that I wouldn't come back. Scared that his father was choosing the cold night over the warm home he needed. I told myself I just needed a few minutes. But a few minutes turned into hours. I walked through the snow-covered streets, letting the cold numb my face, my hands, my thoughts. I passed houses glowing with soft lights, families gathered inside, laughter echoing from behind closed curtains. I remember feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. Not outside, not inside, not even in my own skin. I walked until I couldn't feel my feet. I walked until I convinced myself that cooling down was the right thing to do. But the truth was that I wasn't cooling down, I was running away. When I finally returned, the house was dark. Grace was in bed, awake but silent, disappointment heavy in the air between us. Ethan was on the couch, curled up under a blanket, still holding that small gift. He wasn't asleep. His eyes were red, either from crying or from trying not to. I didn't know how to approach him. Shame had a way of stiffening my bones. So I did the worst thing again, I let the moment pass. I kissed his head softly, thinking it was enough, and whispered that I loved him. But love whispered too late becomes just another sound in the room. The next morning, when he handed me the gift, his hands shook. It was a small drawing he had made of our family standing beside a snowman. A simple picture, full of innocence, full of hope. I told him it was beautiful. But inside, guilt tangled itself around every part of me. And from that Christmas on, something inside Ethan changed. Not all at once, but slowly, like frost creeping across a window. Now, sitting alone in the present, I understood why the watch hurt him. It wasn't just an object, it was the ticking memory of every night he waited, every door he watched, every fear that I wouldn't come back. It was the symbol of a father who walked away when he was needed most. In the quiet of the living room, I looked at the watch again. The ticking felt different now, slower somehow, heavier, like it carried not time but guilt. And yet, beneath all that weight, there was something else, a small spark of hope, the faint possibility that I could still fix what I broke. Because secrets don't stay quiet forever. And I had a feeling Ethan was hiding something deeper than fear, something that connected to that night in a way I didn't yet understand. I knew then that before the day ended, I needed to talk to him. Truly talk to him. Not as a tired man, not as a frustrated father, but as someone who finally understood the damage he had done. But I didn't know that the truth waiting behind his silence would shake the ground beneath me. I found Ethan in the kitchen late that afternoon, standing by the sink with his hands braced on the counter, staring out the window as if the snow could explain something he couldn't say. The light outside was fading, turning the world into that soft blue shade that comes just before night settles in. It reminded me of evenings long ago, when Grace would hum quietly while stirring a pot on the stove, when Ethan would draw pictures at the table with crayons worn down to little stubs. But now the kitchen felt hollow, like all the warmth had slipped out through the cracks in the floor. I stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure if I should speak. My throat felt tight, as if every word I had held back for years was trying to come out at once, forming a knot I couldn't untangle. Ethan didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He always seemed to sense when I was near, even in childhood, though back then his awareness was hopeful. Now it felt guarded, as if he were preparing himself for something he had learned to expect. I stepped in slowly. Not because I wanted to sneak up on him, but because I feared any sudden movement would shatter the fragile quiet between us. I opened my mouth, thinking I could start with something simple, his name, a soft greeting, but nothing came out. For a moment, I wondered if silence was all we had left. But then Ethan spoke first, his voice steady but low. He asked me why I had given him the watch. Just that. Not angrily, not accusingly. A simple question, yet it sank into me like a stone sinking through deep water. I told him it was meant to be his one day, that it had belonged to Arthur, that it represented the men in our family, our history, our bond. But as I spoke, I realized how hollow it all sounded. My words felt like decorations placed on a broken tree, pretty from far away, meaningless up close. Ethan turned toward me then, and for the first time that day, I truly looked into his eyes. They weren't angry. They weren't even sad. They were tired. The kind of tiredness that grows after years of carrying something alone, something heavy enough to bend a person's spirit but not quite break it. He asked me if I remembered the night I walked out on Christmas, the night the snow was heavy and the house was warm and I chose the storm outside instead of the warmth inside. I nodded, ashamed, barely able to look at him. He told me that night changed him. Not because I left, but because he thought I wouldn't come back. He said that after the door closed, he sat on the stairs for hours, holding his breath every time a car passed, praying it was me. Praying I had remembered him. Praying I had chosen him. He told me that even after I returned, something inside him stayed frozen. A crack had formed, one that never fully closed. He said that every Christmas after that, no matter how old he got, he waited for the sound of the door late at night, not because he wanted gifts or stories, but because he wanted proof I was still there. Proof I wasn't leaving again. Proof I wouldn't disappear into the cold. I felt those words hit me like a blow to the chest. I had known he was hurt. I had known I had made mistakes. But I had never imagined the depth of his fear, the way it had followed him into adulthood, how each tick of Arthur's watch reminded him not of legacy, but of waiting alone in the dark for footsteps that came too late. And then, he told me the part one never expected, something he had carried for years, something that explained everything far more deeply than I had imagined. He told me Grace had cried that night after I left. Not because she was angry at me, but because Ethan had come into the bedroom shaking, asking if I was ever coming back. She held him for hours, whispering that I loved him, telling him I would never abandon him. But deep down, she wasn't sure. Ethan knew she wasn't sure. Children can sense those things. And knowing that his mother, his safe place, was worried too, carved another wound into him, a wound that shaped the way he saw me from that night on. He told me he never spoke about it because he believed that if he brought it up, it would break what little peace we had left. He said he stayed quiet because he didn't want to lose me again. And that silence, year after year, became a habit. It became easier to say nothing than to risk everything. When he finished telling me, he looked down at his hands as if ashamed of his vulnerability. But he had no reason to be ashamed. I was the one who felt shame burning in my chest like a slow fire, spreading through every corner of my ribs. I stepped closer, my voice trembling as I asked him why he refused the watch. He lifted his head, and his answer was simple, but it carried the weight of decades. He said the watch reminded him of waiting. Waiting for me when I didn't show up. Waiting for the front door to open. Waiting for promises I forgot I made. He said the ticking inside that old case felt like the heartbeat of every fear he had carried alone. And wearing it felt like carrying my mistakes on his wrist. I felt something inside me collapse. Not break, collapse. As if all the walls I had built to protect my pride finally crumbled, exposing the truth I had ignored. I told him I never meant to hurt him. He nodded gently, but he didn't say he forgave me. Not yet. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't arrive in a moment. It arrives slowly, like snow falling in the dark. The room felt smaller then, as if our honesty had pulled the walls closer. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and cold air. Ethan's shoulders loosened, as if speaking the truth had lifted something off him. Not everything, but something. And as I stood there, I felt the distance between us shift, still there, still wide, but no longer frozen. A small part had thawed. But I could tell in his eyes that he still wasn't done. There was more. Something deeper. Something sharper. Something hidden behind years of silence. And when he told me the next part, I felt the ground beneath my feet slip. Ethan didn't speak right away. He just stood there in the kitchen, the pale winter light painting his face in soft blues and grays, shadows under his eyes like bruises left by old memories. I could feel the air shift, heavy in the way a room becomes right before someone finally tells the truth they've been holding on to for too many years. He breathed slowly, steadying himself, and for a moment I almost told him to stop. Not because I didn't want to hear it, but because I was terrified that whatever he was about to say would be the final thread unraveling everything I believed I still had a chance to fix. He asked me if I remembered the time on the watch the night I left, the Christmas when I walked out. I frowned, not understanding. He repeated the question, his voice quieter, and I thought back, forcing my mind through the fog of years I had tried to forget. I remembered the sound of the front door closing behind me, the cold air biting my skin, the way the streetlights shimmered on the snow. I remembered checking the watch that night while walking, the ticking steady against my palm. But the time. I couldn't remember the exact time. Then Ethan told me. He said the watch had stopped ticking that night. Stopped completely. The moment was burned into his memory like a scar, 11:47 p.m. He said he knew the exact time because after I walked out, he waited at the top of the stairs, still holding that small wrapped gift, and he listened to the house creak, to the wind outside, to the soft, quiet sobs of Grace trying not to wake him. And when he finally got up and walked into the living room, he saw my watch on the mantel where I had placed it earlier. It was still open, the ticking loud enough for him to hear from across the room. He picked it up, carefully, gently, the way he used to hold fragile things as a child, and pressed it to his ear. No sound. The ticking was gone. He told me that in his young mind, the watch stopping meant something terrible. He thought it meant I wouldn't come back. That time had given up on us. That a father only walks away like that when he's done being a father. He sat there, alone in the dim glow of the Christmas tree, staring at the watch's frozen hands pointing at 11:47 p.m., believing that moment was the exact second his world shifted. I felt something inside me twist, slow, sharp, merciless. I had never known. I had never imagined the kinds of meanings a child's heart could attach to something so small. And yet children always do, they build entire universes from the crumbs adults leave behind. Ethan said he carried that moment with him through every Christmas that followed. Every time the clock neared 11:47, he felt his chest tighten. Every year, he watched the door, afraid history would repeat itself. And when I gave him the watch last night, he felt that same cold fear rise inside him, the same fear that shaped his childhood. That's why he refused it. Not out of anger. Not out of disrespect. But because wearing it felt like carrying the moment I left, carrying the second everything broke. He looked at me then, and his eyes weren't cold or distant anymore. They were wounded. And behind that wound, I saw something even worse, fear that telling me the truth would hurt me. Fear that his honesty could break our fragile attempt at reconnection. It struck me like lightning. Even now, after all these years, he was still protecting me from the consequences of my own actions. I stepped closer, slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal, afraid that any wrong move would make him pull away. My voice shook as I asked him why he never told me. Why he carried this alone. Why he let that moment define us without giving me a chance to change it. He said he was scared. Scared that speaking the truth out loud would make it real. Scared that if he told me how deeply that night hurt him, I would brush it off, just like I brushed off his fears when he was a child. He said it was easier to pretend time moved forward even when it didn't. When he finished, the room felt unbearably quiet. The refrigerator hummed softly. A few snowflakes drifted against the window. The heater clicked. But in the space between us, there was only the sound of two hearts trying to relearn each other's beat. I told him I was sorry. Really sorry. The words felt raw coming out, like something ripped from the deepest part of me. I told him I wished I could go back to that night, hold him, stay inside, choose warmth instead of cold. I told him I wished I had never made him feel the kind of fear no child should ever feel. The watch sat on the counter beside him, still silent, its hands frozen in place. I reached for it, but before touching it I looked at Ethan. He nodded, just once, giving me silent permission. I picked it up. It was colder than I remembered. I turned it in my hand, its familiar weight grounding me. The time was still there, still pointed at that terrible minute. 11:47 p.m. The moment I walked out. Ethan said something then, something that felt like a small crack of hope breaking through years of frost. He said time didn't stop the moment I left. It stopped the moment he believed I wouldn't return. And that fear stayed inside him long after the watch fell silent. As I held the watch, I realized something I had never understood before. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about understanding the weight of someone else's pain. And until that moment, I had never truly understood Ethan's. I placed the watch on the table gently, as if laying down a piece of our history. The hands were still frozen, but something inside me shifted, small, delicate, but real. And I knew then that if I wanted the watch to tick again, if I wanted us to heal, I would need to fix more than metal and gears. I would need to fix the time between us. But what Ethan said next? That was the moment I realized the watch wasn't the only thing frozen in the past. Ethan didn't sit down after telling me about the watch. He just stood there, gripping the edge of the counter as if the truth he had carried for years had taken more strength out of him than he expected. I watched his fingers curl slightly, the knuckles pale, the tension running through his arms like a quiet tremor. I wanted to reach out, to place a hand on his shoulder the same way I used to when he was small and scared. But my hesitation felt like a wall between us, one built slowly over years of silence and missed chances. I feared that touching him too soon, after all he had revealed, might feel like claiming forgiveness I hadn't yet earned. The room was still. The kind of stillness that feels alive, pulsing with the weight of everything said and everything waiting to be said. The snow outside kept falling softly, brushing the window like gentle fingertips. It made the kitchen glow faintly, a soft blue shimmer slipping through the glass. Christmas had always carried a quiet kind of magic, even in the hardest years. And that afternoon, for the first time in a long while, I felt that magic again, not as joy, but as possibility. I asked Ethan what he meant when he said the watch wasn't the only thing frozen in the past. My voice was soft, the question barely more than a breath. I wasn't asking out of fear or curiosity. I asked because I finally understood I had spent too long running from the truth, and now I needed to face every part of it. He inhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling with effort. He told me there was something he never shared with me, something that happened long before Grace passed, something that shaped the way he saw himself, not just the way he saw me. He said he didn't speak of it because he didn't want to make things heavier for me, because he knew I already carried guilt like a second skin. That alone made my heart twist. My son, even after everything, still trying to protect me. He said that the night I left wasn't the first time he felt I was slipping away from him. He said he had always been afraid to disappoint me, afraid that needing too much, feeling too deeply, asking for comfort would make him seem weak in my eyes. He said he tried to be strong, to be quiet, to be helpful, to be invisible when he thought my stress was too heavy. And all the while, he kept his fears locked inside, shaking alone in his room at night when the shadows grew too big. He said he struggled with something I never noticed, an anxiety that tightened his chest when I left late at night, a panic that made him feel like the walls were closing in when he heard the door slam too hard. He hid it because he thought I expected him to be tough, to grow out of emotions I told myself boys didn't need to talk about. He told me that for years, he believed love had rules he needed to learn, rules about silence, rules about strength, rules about holding his pain alone. I sank into the nearest chair as he spoke, each word cutting deeper than the last. Because I realized then that the picture I had of our past, of me being present enough, good enough, was a painting made of illusions I created to protect myself. I never intended to teach Ethan those rules. But children learn from what they see, not from what we think we're saying. And he had grown into a man who didn't know how to ask for help because he grew up watching a father who never asked for anything either. A father who drowned his feelings in work. A father who believed endurance was love. A father who hid behind quiet instead of truth. He said he didn't reject the watch to punish me. He rejected it because he worried accepting it would mean accepting the version of us that carried all that pain. He wanted to break the cycle. He wanted to start over. But he didn't know how to tell me that without hurting me. The irony was cruel and beautiful at the same time. We were both trying not to hurt each other, and in the process, we hurt each other more than we ever intended. I felt tears gather in my eyes, a burning warmth I hadn't felt in years. I didn't hide them this time. I let them fall. I told Ethan, with a voice shaking more than I expected, that I had failed him, not because I didn't love him, but because I didn't know how to show it in ways that mattered. I told him I grew up in a world where men were told not to feel, not to cry, not to apologize. And I passed those chains onto him without knowing. I told him I was sorry, not in the shallow way I had whispered years ago, but in the deep way a father apologizes when he realizes his son grew up carrying burdens that never belonged on his shoulders. For a moment, Ethan didn't move. He just stood there, watching me with that tired, guarded expression. Then, slowly, he stepped closer. Not a dramatic moment, not an embrace that fixed everything at once. Just a small step, a quiet, simple gesture that felt like a door opening somewhere inside both of us. He sat down across from me. His voice softened. He said he didn't want perfection. He didn't want promises. He didn't want speeches. He just wanted honesty. He wanted a father he could talk to, not a man hiding behind silence. He wanted us to learn how to understand each other again, even if it took time. I nodded, unable to speak. The watch sat between us on the table, its hands frozen at 11:47 p.m. But somehow, it didn't feel like a symbol of pain anymore. It felt like an invitation, an opening. A reminder that time can stop, yes, but it can also start again, even if the first tick is quiet and small. Ethan reached out and gently closed the watch's lid. It didn't tick. But I felt something inside me shift, the faintest spark of warmth, a heartbeat stirring after a long winter. I knew then that what mattered wasn't fixing the past. What mattered was moving forward, step by step, breath by breath, truth by truth. And for the first time in years, I believed it might actually be possible. But something unexpected still waited ahead, one last moment that would define what came next. That night, when the sky outside had already turned into a deep, silent blue and the snow lay thick on the roofs and sidewalks of our small town, the house felt different. Not entirely healed, not suddenly bright, but different. As if someone had opened a window in a room that had been closed for years, letting in fresh air that burned the lungs at first, but slowly, gently, made it easier to breathe. The Christmas tree lights were still on, blinking their slow, steady rhythm in the living room. I had turned off most of the other lamps, leaving only that warm glow to hold the darkness back. The watch lay on the coffee table in front of me, its lid closed, its hands still frozen at 11:47 p.m. I sat on the same chair where I had imagined, for so many years, giving that watch to Ethan as a symbol of pride and connection. Now I knew it was something else. Not a symbol of legacy, but a reminder of a wound that had never been properly treated. I held the watch gently in my palm, feeling the cold metal against my skin. I thought about Arthur, my grandfather, walking beside me through old snowy streets, his hand heavy but safe around mine. I thought about Grace, filling the house with warmth even when her own heart was tired. I thought about Ethan, a boy who had learned to be quiet when he should have learned to be heard. And I thought about myself, a man who had spent too many years believing love could survive without being spoken, without being shown. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Ethan walked into the living room, the soft light catching the edges of his face, making him look both older and younger at the same time. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Not like strangers. Not like enemies. Just like two people standing at the edge of something new. He asked if he could sit. I nodded. He took a place on the couch, not too far, not too close. The space between us didn't feel as wide as it had before. It felt possible. Like a bridge we were still building, plank by plank, carefully, afraid it could crack but hoping it wouldn't. I turned the watch over in my hand and then placed it on the table between us, the small metal case catching the light from the tree. I told him that when Arthur gave me that watch, he said time was the only thing a man truly spent that never came back. I told him I was afraid I had spent too much of it wrong. Too much in silence, too much in absence, too much thinking that tomorrow was guaranteed. Ethan stared at the watch, his eyes steady, no longer running away from it. He asked me what I wanted to do with it now. His voice wasn't cold. It wasn't defensive. It carried something I hadn't heard from him in a long time: openness. I thought about it. I could have asked him to take it anyway, begging for a second chance at the moment I had imagined. I could have forced the symbol. But symbols mean nothing if they don't match the reality they're tied to. So I told him the truth, that I didn't want the watch to be a weight on his wrist or a chain to the worst night of his childhood. I said I wanted it to be whatever he needed it to be, even if that meant it stayed on my shelf and never touched his skin. He was quiet for a moment, his gaze shifting from the watch to the Christmas tree, then back to me. Finally, he said we could fix it. The watch, he meant. He suggested we take it to the small repair shop downtown, the one near the corner bakery that still smelled like fresh bread in the early mornings. We could go together. Not to erase what the watch had meant before, but to give it a new meaning. A shared one. The idea hit me with a gentle kind of force. Not dramatic, not explosive, but strong enough to move something inside me. Fix it together. Not me alone, not him alone. Together. It was a simple plan for the next day, but it felt like more than that. It felt like the first promise we were making as two people finally learning how to walk side by side again. I asked him if he was sure. He nodded. He said he might never wear it every day. He might never feel fully comfortable with it. But maybe, just maybe, the watch didn't have to be a symbol of fear anymore. Maybe it could be a symbol of what we were choosing to do now: face the past, repair what could be repaired, accept what could not, and move forward anyway. I felt tears rise again, but this time they weren't made only of regret. They held something else too, something lighter: relief. Hope. I told him that if the watch started ticking again, every sound it made would remind me of the second chance I never thought I'd have. And if it never ticked again, if the damage was too deep, then it would still remind me of the night we finally spoke the truth. Silence settled between us once more, but it didn't hurt like before. It felt like the comfortable quiet that comes when words have done enough for a while and hearts simply need time to rest. We sat there, side by side, watching the lights blink on the tree, listening to the soft hum of the heater and the faint whisper of winter outside. For the first time in many years, I didn't feel the need to pick up my phone, or turn on the television, or escape into noise. I stayed in the quiet with my son, and the quiet didn't scare me. It held us. I thought of Grace and what she would say if she could see us. I imagined her smiling that tired, patient smile, saying it was about time these two stubborn men opened their mouths and their hearts. I imagined her sitting on the arm of the couch, one hand on Ethan's shoulder, one on mine, glad that the distance she had worried about for so long was finally shrinking. After a while, Ethan stood up and said he was going to make some tea. He asked if I wanted a cup. It was such a simple question. Ordinary. Every day. But it felt like a gift. I said yes. My voice didn't shake this time. As he moved into the kitchen, I stayed there, staring at the watch on the table. Christmas had always been, for me, about gifts, decorations, big gestures. I spent years trying to make up for my absence with bigger trees, more lights, extra presents, fancy dinners. But sitting there in the dim glow, I understood something I had missed my whole life. The true watch of Christmas isn't made of metal and glass. It's not something you carry in your pocket or strap to your wrist. It's the time you choose to give to the people you love. It's the moment you sit and listen instead of leaving. The minute you say I'm sorry and mean it. The hour you spend being present, fully present, with no excuse and no rush. That is the time that matters. That is the time that changes everything. I realized then that I had wasted so much of it. But I also realized something else. I still had some left. Enough to sit at a table with my son. Enough to walk with him to a small repair shop in the morning. Enough to learn how to say the words I should have spoken years ago. Enough to show him, not through objects or traditions, but through presence, that he mattered more than anything else. Ethan came back with 2 steaming mugs. He handed one to me. Our fingers brushed for a second. Such a small touch. But inside, it felt like the first heartbeat of a new beginning. That night, as Christmas wrapped itself around our little house, I didn't pray for more money, more years, more chances. I prayed for courage. Courage to keep talking. Courage to keep listening. Courage to stay when things felt heavy instead of escaping into the cold. The watch on the table stayed still, its hands frozen at 11:47 p.m. But inside me, time began to move again. And that, I finally understood, is the true miracle of Christmas, not the lights, not the gifts, not the perfect memories. The miracle is the chance, even after years of mistakes, to sit across from someone you love and say, I'm here now. I was late. I was wrong. But I'm here. And as long as there is breath in me, I will not waste the time we still have. Because in the end, the greatest gift we can give is not something wrapped in paper or kept inside a velvet box. The greatest gift is ourselves, whole and honest, willing to face the past and still choose love. And that is the watch I hope my son will carry, long after I'm gone, the quiet, steady ticking of a heart that finally learned what truly matters on Christmas night.